And we are live. All right. Well, Phil, we got Dr. Anthony Chaffee with us today. I didn't introduce the show because I figure anybody who's listened to us for any length of time has heard me do that intro. How many times? This is like show number 65 or something. I don't know. I've done it a lot. Um, so we got Dr. Anthony Chaffee here with us today. I've done a little research on this dude, and I have questions, but I would like to ask you, why is he here?
Yes, definitely. I've been excited to talk with Anthony for quite a bit now. We've had a number of other physicians on. We've had family doctors, we've had cardiologists, we've had orthopedic surgeon, but I figured it was time for us to finally bring out the big guns and get the brain surgeon on. So, but Anthony's got a fascinating background and, has been involved personally, I know, and I'll let him tell his story with metabolic health for quite a while, and now professionally as well. And he's halfway around the world, three quarters around the world in Australia, doing his training in neurosurgery now. So, Anthony, why don't you fill in a little bit more of your background for our audience and tell us how you got interested in metabolic health and what's brought you to where you are today?
Well, thank you both very much for having me on. I really do appreciate the opportunity. As you say, I'm an American medical doctor, but I'm currently in Australia and previously lived in Europe as well. Played rugby at a high level in the US and in Europe and Canada. Since I was 18, really, and I've always been very interested in diet, nutrition, how that had affected our health, specifically for an athletic performance, sort of thing early on, but also because I was always interested in medicine and becoming a doctor. It made a lot of sense, that I would look into that. I was always very interested in biology, and so I just wanted to know what was optimal for me as an athlete. And when I was taking cancer biology at the University of Washington in Seattle 22 years ago, I had a professor that just walked us through just the fact that plants use defense chemicals in order to protect themselves from animals and insects from being eaten, and that's how they survive in the wild, because nature's kill or be killed for plants as well as animals. And we were doing this on a cancer, from a cancer perspective. So we were looking at carcinogens, and we learned that Brussels sprouts had 136 identified carcinogens at the time. Mushrooms had over 100. Spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, every vegetable you've ever come across had 60 or 80 or over 100 known human carcinogens, and they're quite abundant. We know from the work of Dr. Bruce Ames at UC Berkeley in 1989 that there are about 10,000 times more toxic elements in the plants themselves than the pesticides we sprayed on them, and that the naturally occurring poisons were far more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides we sprayed on them, which is why we still have pesticides, because they were trying to ban them in the 1980s. And he just said, oh, wait, hold on a second. We've been using these things for 80 years. Like, why now? Why are they causing a problem now? And so he did the research, and he showed that if you're going to eat the spinach anyway, the pesticides are actually a drop in the bucket. We were quite taken aback by that. And we found that, and I remember looking around, we're just like, all of us were just looking around wildly, like looking for like a TA, like, snickering in the corner, like, oh, he does this all the time. It must be a joke. And there wasn't anything like that. And it slowly dawned on us that he was actually serious. And I remember thinking in my head, like, well, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And he just must have read our minds, because he looked at us and said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So I said, right, screw plants. And I just stopped eating them. And I went to the grocery store, and I just went through the aisles, and it's just like, everything is a plant. Everything has plants. Everything's come from a plant, or at least has plants mixed in with them. And so I was just walking around like, well, what do I eat? And I just was like, eggs. Okay, eggs, that doesn't come from a plant. Walked by some meat. I was like, great, meat, that doesn't come from a plant. And so I just ate eggs, meat, and sometimes milk for 5 years after that, because specifically to not eat plants. And so I inadvertently started eating what I think is our natural human diet. And I had massive benefits from this, from a health and athletic perspective. My athletic performance just went through the roof. I stopped being able to tire myself out. I was able to my exercise tolerance grew tremendously. The harder I pushed myself, my body just soared. And I got to the point where I just couldn't get tired. I couldn't run out of energy. I didn't get sore from working out, which was very strange to me. But I found that if I had any sort of plant material, especially, grains or carbs, I was, sore as you would expect to be after working out. But if I didn't have any of those, I was not sore. So I came to the conclusion this was, these toxins in plants that were actually causing this stiffness, soreness, and swelling. So I did that for 5 years and then just sort of slipped off of that. When I was living in England, I didn't have the same access to meat. Some of the meat was breaded, and I just thought like, oh, is it that big of a deal? And that was just sort of, slipped down, the path, back to eating a more traditional sort of diet. I never ate like much processed foods or anything like that. It was always whole foods, but I started incorporating plants again. And then about 5 years ago, I came across some, information that was just like, no, humans actually are carnivores. This is actually the kind of animal that we are. And I was a doctor at that time, taking some time off to help my folks and do humanitarian work in Bangladesh. And everything just clicked. It's like, okay, that's why I felt so amazing in my early 20s. Because I stopped eating plants. I was just living as humans have traditionally lived and eating what we were supposed to eat. And looking at medicine from that perspective, things just started slotting into place. Thinking that, humans are animals. The kind of animal we are is a carnivore, but we're not living as such. And we're eating things outside of our species. And as any zookeeper will tell you, if you feed an animal something that it doesn't eat in the wild, something it didn't evolve on, it gets very sick. But what do they get sick with? They get obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, arthritis, autoimmune diseases. And this is why you have signs at the zoo is they don't feed the animals. It makes them very sick. And, but people forgot to put those signs up in front of our refrigerators. And so I started approaching medicine from that perspective. And I started diving into the literature and trying to find out as much as I could about what we knew and what we could prove, and then see what we could apply and practice in real life. And I've just been doing that for the last several years now.
Okay, so you're not on a show where we're going to push back against that, because we're all pretty much on board with the basic idea. However, you're in an industry, and I don't hesitate to call medicine an industry, where that particular message, as best as I can tell from the guests we've interviewed over the last year, is not greeted with open arms. So you're training to be a neurosurgeon. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So how's this I'm a carnivore message play there in the neurosurgery locker room?
Yeah. Well, it's actually been quite well received. When I started digging into the research, I had the virtue of a little free time because I was helping out with some family issues. And so I spent months just reading papers and studying this subject, and looking at vegan websites and the plant-based people and saying, okay, what am I missing? This is what it looks like to me, but maybe I don't want to be a victim of confirmation bias. What's the other side of the story? And what's the other argument? And I just found that there were quite a lot of flaws in their arguments, and this actually reinforced what I was thinking. And you're right. A lot of people push back just in everyday life, and some people would just get angry at me and say, "It's like, you're a doctor, like that's ridiculous. You can't say that." And I was like, "Well, all right, and let's talk about it." And I was able to, debate people and explain it to people, sometimes a couple times a day, because people would just get really shocked. So by the time that I was, back, in my department now, or other departments, I was pretty well versed in the arguments on why we're carnivores and why this matters and the difference that it makes. So people were just sort of interested. When they found out, I never sort of telegraphed it, but it's quite obvious that when you're not drinking coffee with everyone, which is like really weird in medicine, everyone just lives on coffee, and and then you go out to lunch, you guys grab breakfast, something like that, and I'm just eating bacon and eggs and never having coffee. Like, it comes up, and so people would ask questions and I had answers, and a few of the people got very interested, and we would just sit down if we had some time, and we would just talk more about it. I'd send them resources, I'd send them links to studies, and they became very interested. So actually, half the department sort of tried it out, and there was a number of people that became we just went full carnivore as well. One guy was a vegan. He was from India. His family were religiously vegan, and he had been vegan just for health reasons. He was trying to find the best way to go. And Australia is a very, very big vegan movement, and it's growing in popularity. And so I came in, right at that time when it was just at its peak. So it was just, people look at me like I had three heads, but I was able to convince even vegetarians and vegans of this. I have a pretty good record, like people who actually engage with me and ask me questions, even aggressively, if they'll hang out and listen to the answers. So even if they're trying to, like, oh, listen to this and then I'll say something, I've been able to convince all of them. I have a 100% kill rate on converting vegans at the moment.
What's
and
the best question they ask?
They're all pretty much the same. It's always, well, what about cholesterol? But what about, doesn't red meat cause bowel cancer? And I mean, these are very, very
they're not even good
well
questions.
established. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, because, well, but that's the thing. I think it's very well established that those are have been completely overturned, but not everyone knows that, and so that's the major thing. I mean, that's been going on for 40 years. That's why people started avoiding red meat in the first place, was because cholesterol and saturated fat, and they're still teaching that in dietetics and nutrition schools, and it's quite surprising. I mean, I literally heard a very senior colorectal surgeon cautioning his patients, don't eat red meat, it causes bowel cancer. I'm like, no, you should know better than that. And it's just that's, you repeat things so many times, people just believe that they're true. And so, yeah, they're not great questions. And well, what about the vitamins? You're missing out on vitamins. Oh, but plants are so good for you. They have all these nutrients, which is true. They have nutrients. They're living things. They have things that are good for other living things, but they also come at a price. They come with a lot of defense chemicals. All plants do, to varying degrees. And it's not that some are more or less poisonous because they make more or less poisons. It's just they're more or less poisonous to us because we have certain defenses to certain poisons and less defenses to others. Spinach isn't as bad for us as hemlock, but there are things that eat hemlock that can't eat spinach, because they have those defenses that we don't.
Yeah,
I do have a question about, it is my understanding that our teeth indicate that we're omnivores.
Mm-hmm.
Can you address that from the carnivore standpoint?
Well, yeah, certainly. I would first, mention, just say that, what is our working definition of an omnivore? Is something that is able to eat plants, and to what degree? Because even cats and big cats, small cats, they're considered obligate carnivores, but there are some plants that they can eat, and this arrives in their kibble that they're fed in packaged food. Most plants will kill a feline. We can eat more plants, certainly, but they can eat some plants. Does that make them an omnivore? Probably not. Same with dogs. They're considered scavenger carnivores, makes them eat some more plants, but they can eat much less plants than humans can. So we come from an herbivorous past. About sort of 6-8 million years ago, it came from herbivores, and then our ancestors started eating meat, and we sort of split off, and that's the train we went down. So we come from a more recent herbivorous past than dogs and cats. And so, but we're also primates. So we have primate teeth, but we have adaptations that I think are due to that turn to eating meat, at first omnivory, but then carnivory. Our teeth became smaller. They're not big like a gorilla. We're eating softer and softer food, and we're not chewing on sticks like a gorilla does. Gorillas have big fangs. We don't have big fangs. We don't need them. Those can be defensive as well as offensive, and they're need driven. We didn't kill things with our mouths. We didn't attack things with our face and our claws, because we figured out ways of getting meat. We were using pound stones to crack open the skulls of animals that had already been killed by bigger animals, bigger predators, and get at the brains. And our ancestors, we have fossil records going back millions of years for that. And then we started using stone tools with a sharp razor edge, and then we could actually cut the meat off of things. So we didn't have claws, we didn't have teeth, but that's because we didn't kill things with our mouths and our hands. So that's how we developed tools. That's why we had to develop tools. We had to develop our brains. We had to figure out these sorts of things. And so our brains became bigger, and we got more clever with tools and tactics. So we have just evolved slightly differently. Our teeth specifically became smaller. Our jaws and our muscles of mastication became smaller, because again, we're just chewing on softer food. The head of a gorilla, if you take it away and look at the skull, it's just this big ridge of bone, and not as much brain as you would think for the size of their head, because most of that is the muscles of mastication, because they're just chewing. People think that we have flat teeth. They'll argue it's like, oh, it looks flat in the front, just like a horse or a cow or something like that. But that's not what flat teeth are. Flat teeth are planar, like a millstone, and they can slide across each other and grind down fibrous plants and break them down and digest them easier. But we don't. We have bicuspid teeth. If you clench your jaws and try to move your jaw, it doesn't go anywhere. And that's because we're just clamping down like that. We're not going side to side. We can move our jaw side to side. That's usually something you see in an herbivore. But we did come from an herbivorous past, and you don't lose a trait unless evolutionarily, unless there's a specific survival advantage associated with losing that trait. Otherwise, you just keep it on, like color vision. Actually, there is an advantage. There's some advantage to for hunting, for losing color vision. Seeing black and white, you can actually see animals in foliage better. And you can see it at low light times, like sort of dawn and dusk, a little better. And so there is an advantage. And I've spoken to people that are sort of like, red-green colorblind, and they're like, and they go hunting, like, yeah, it's so much easier. I can see things way easier than other people. Okay. So there is an advantage there, but there's also going to be advantages to seeing color as well. So, there's a bit of a trade-off. I think that's why we didn't all go. But, we have primate teeth primarily, and we have carnivorous adaptations to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
I'll take that. I'll accept that.
Yeah, and that really brings up the question of, there's a difference between what we can eat and what is optimal for us to eat.
Absolutely.
And, what's always been interesting to me is that you look at whether it's the physicians in this space, and they tend to come at this from two different directions. Some of us have been focused on, fixing health problems, preventing health problems, obesity. Others, like yourself, had a focus on, high-level performance. But we end up at the same place. I mean, I think it's pretty clear what is optimal for us to eat as humans is a mostly carnivorous diet, with maybe a little bit of this other stuff sprinkled in. But really, those were survival foods. When we look at an evolutionary standpoint, the only reason we really ate plants was because we couldn't get any meat, we couldn't get any kind of product.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and that's sort of going back to the, the omnivores versus carnivores question, like how are we defining that? I think of it slightly differently. I think of, a more practical definition of an omnivore is one of two things. Either there are things in plants that you have to have that you cannot get from meat. So you have to eat plants. And there are things in meat that you have to get that you cannot get from those plants. So you have to eat meat as well. So you have to eat both. Or you can get semi-equal nutrition from certain plants as you can from meat. And so it doesn't matter. You can eat these sort of things interchangeably, but we don't fall into either of those categories. There are things in meat that we have to have that we cannot get from plants, but there is nothing in plants that we have to have that we cannot get from meat. And we certainly can't eat them indiscriminately. We won't get the same nutrition from plants. They're not bioavailability. There aren't the same nutrients available. And also they cause harm. And so meat is, I think, like you said, is our optimal nutrition. And so I think because we're obligated to eat meat, that we are more correctly obligate carnivores. I don't think that, I think that sort of those definition of terms needs to be updated, I think.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense to the layperson here in the group. Obligate carnivores because there's nothing. I want to be able to say this the way you said it. There's things we have to have that we can only get from meat.
Mm-hmm.
We can't get
Correct.
some of the things. There's nothing we get from meat. No. There's nothing we get from plants that we can't get from meat that we need.
Yeah.
And there's things that we have to get that we can only get from meat.
Correct.
Plants. You still said it way better than I did.
Yeah. And the other thing that I would add to that is that, the meat that we are eating, that animal, oftentimes they are herbivores and they have eaten the plants and they are better able to process the plant than we are, especially when you look in the room of family. They have 4 stomachs designed to break down plant product and to maximally extract nutrients from it. We have nowhere near the same level of nutrient extraction from plants that living animals do. And then so when we eat the meat from the living animal, we are getting those nutrients that they then get from the plant.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm going to let our listeners know Phil is coming to us from the airport. He's going to get on an airplane here in just a little bit. So he's got we're having to deal with airport level connections here. And the miracle is that it sounds as good as it does. So, all right.
So tell us a little bit, what got you interested in neurosurgery?
Yeah.
What's the training been like for that so far?
Yeah. Well, I've been interested in sort of every aspect of medicine. I was, everything I came across, I'm like, wow, that's fantastic. And it was difficult for me to choose overall what I wanted to do, but I knew I really liked surgery. That was definitely something that I preferred. I just thought, the thought of being able to, fix someone physically with my hands, like go inside their body and fix them physically with my hands, I just thought was just the most incredible thing in the world. And so that was something that really appealed to me. Neurosurgery in particular, just because I came across it early on in my medical school training and was just quite blown away by it. I went into a surgery where a lady had got kicked in the face by a horse, and they had to, open her up from ear to ear and pull down her scalp and try to recreate and reconstruct the, frontal sinuses and all these big fractures. And I was really awestruck by that, just thinking, I saw her skull. I was like, wow, her brain is just right under there. Like that's what makes her who she is, the kind of person she is. That's all encapsulated in that one organ. And I was quite taken aback by that thought. And so the next day I was like, okay, I want to go see, more neurosurgery cases. And I went in and just started, just scrubbing into any neurosurgery cases that they'd let me into. And saw the skull come off, and saw the brain, and saw it pulsating sort of out of the skull. And I remember thinking, it was like that is everything that person is. That's who they are as a person, their entire humanity, memories, feelings. There's the memory they have of their dog on their 7th birthday exists somewhere in there, and you can touch it with your finger. And I just thought that was just such an amazing thing. And I just wanted to learn a lot more about it. I might've been, just as taken aback if I saw, cardiothoracic surgery, open heart surgery at the time. I didn't even see it actually, my first open heart case, until I was, a doctor a few years in. I saw, I'm like, that's amazing. Just actually seeing like, the heart moving, the lungs moving at this real time. I was like, that doesn't even look real. It looks like a machine or something like that. It looks like it's just something that can't be real. And so, but I was exposed to that early on, and I was very impressed by it. And I was just like, okay, I just want to see as many of these as I can. And so I wasn't even, assigned to neurosurgery. I just like skipped my rotation and just went to all these neurosurgery cases. I just tried to go see as many of them as I could. And so that interest just, was planted early on, and it's just always stuck with me. And I think that it's, I just think it's an incredible thing. I like being able to, work in a very, high stress, but in an environment where you can help people in a very acute setting. Obviously there's so many injuries that people can sustain, and in neurosurgery, you have sort of minutes or hours to do something, or else that's it, which is same for anything. But I like that. I like that sort of life and death sort of medicine. I like being able to get a call, see a patient, make a decision right then, and do something for them right there, and be able to save their life. And so that's fit well with me and my personality, and how I like to approach medicine. And then the chronic stuff as well, chronic pain, back pain. A lot of people don't like that. I don't like it either, in a sense, but since coming around to the carnivore thing and seeing people's health and chronic pain be just drastically improved by removing certain things from their diet, I find that I can help more people than otherwise thought possible, just by recommending some dietary changes. And just the surgery as well. I just find it very, very interesting. So it's been a good fit for me from that early interest.
Have you seen enough crossover between, I need to frame this question carefully. So you're working on people's brains in your work, and you've also got this other thing that you do, which is the carnivore lifestyle. Have you seen crossover in those two things? And can you talk about that? And specifically, I'm thinking of compare and contrast. I had a patient who was standard American diet, and then another patient who was a carnivore, and blah, blah, blah. I'm just wondering where you've seen the effects of carnivore in the patients that you work on.
Yeah, I've definitely seen benefits to everyone who's able to try this and put it into practice. Specifically with neurosurgery, we have a lot of chronic pain patients. We have people with entrapped nerves, or canals, spinal canal stenosis, where it's impacting the functionality of their nerves, and they have shooting pain down their bodies. And sometimes you do surgery, you decompress those nerves, and they don't make any substantive recovery, because the nerves have been just damaged and upset and inflamed for so long that they don't end up calming down. And that's very difficult and they go down the chronic pain pathway of medications and counseling and just trying to figure out ways of dealing with this pain. And through my work online, and then being able to suggest this to people that are in that situation, I found that people in those situations with this bad radiculopathy, and it's like sciatica sort of pain, that they can alleviate much of those symptoms.
What did you say? Radiculopathy?
Yeah, that's what it's called when you compress one of the spinal nerves that's coming out.
That's a real thing. Radiculopathy.
Like
yeah. Ridiculous and opathy. Yeah. Am I hearing that right?
Yes, but radiculopathy.
Oh, radical. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I thought, man, I'm gonna win the next round of Scrabble. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I've never heard that.
Yeah.
Word.
Yeah. So it's it's very specific to this sort of issue. Yeah. But
it does tend to cause a ridiculous amount of pain though.
So it does. Yeah. That's true.
You're seeing patients with this pain problem that isn't alleviated by surgery get relief.
Yeah, absolutely. Just by removing the different toxic elements that cause increased inflammation and increased pain response. Just like I noticed with working out and not getting sore, those same toxic elements that would normally latch onto this inflammation that's going on in your body, this normal healthy inflammation that's trying to heal something and causing pain and distress. I sort of think of it as that sort of latching on to any sort of point of healing or disturbance and increasing that pain experience. And that seems to be what is happening. And when you remove those elements from people's diet, they do much better. I can't say that it's going to help everyone, because nothing ever does, but it's going to help people in certain ways. It may not fix all of their problems, but it will help you get better. It will help your health improve, because it's just it's, in my view, the optimal diet for people. And so your body's going to start being optimized, and you can have damage done. You can have permanent issues that aren't going to get better even with diet, and you have things that aren't caused by diet. And so diet's not going to change the fundamental reality of that, but it can improve your experience with it. And I find that it does that with pain as well. There's a diagnosis called fibromyalgia, which is sort of a diagnosis of exclusion. They go down all these different paths. We say, oh, we can't really figure this out. You're just in pain everywhere. We'll call it fibromyalgia. A lot of people I've spoken to really don't think it exists. They think it's in people's heads, or they think that they're just sort of putting it on and just being a bit weak. And yet people are absolutely debilitated, and this has affected their lives for years and decades. And I've had a number of people reach out to me online or over email or in comments of my videos, talking about how they've had radiculopathy or sciatica and chronic pain and fibromyalgia for years or over a decade. And then after a few months on carnivore, it's gone, and they're off their pain meds, and they're so happy about that. People think it's like, oh, they're just trying to get painkillers. And yet this one gentleman was on these painkillers and opiates for 12 years. And all of a sudden he's like, oh, I'm off painkillers for the first time in 12 years. I couldn't be happier. Some people are drug seeking, obviously, but most of these people aren't, I would say. And a lot of these people are really just trying to figure out how they can live with, such a great deal of pain. And I find that this is something that really works to at least improve their situation, and at least improve their experience of that pain. Other than that, oh, sorry, you're going to ask me?
Well, a question that comes to mind is, oftentimes when you make a lifestyle change, you will see a change in your experience as a result of making a change, regardless of what that change happens to be. And my question is, can some of the benefit be explained just by, you were doing this and you just changed it and now you're doing something different? or are the effects long lasting enough that we can point pretty positively and say, the thing you were doing before was what was causing the problem, and changing it is what made the problem go away? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, certainly if there's like a placebo effect, I think, well, this is going to help me. This is going to change my life. And, maybe it does. Maybe they look for reasons why that has, and certainly that could be the case. We don't have, really many studies on specifically looking at a carnivore diet in people. We have that one, study that came out of Harvard with just over 2,000 people, and they found that everyone really improved in, by self-survey for many, many different issues, and then had objective markers as well. They improved their HbA1c in diabetics, for instance. And, that's something you can't fake, and that's not subjective. That's not just, I feel a bit, I think this will help my diabetes, and so it does. That's an objective marker of oxidation and glycation in your body. And so that's a definite improvement. And, we'll get more studies in the future, because I think that's Harvard study in particular has opened the door to people taking a look at this seriously. But, we don't have, especially for like, chronic pain and things like that, we don't really have, long-term data on things, but we certainly have the sort of the practical understanding of how these mechanisms work in our body, which makes sense. But, in practice, I not even telling people, hey, this is going to help your pain. I just, I just argue that, hey, this is optimal for people, and this is the best way to eat. And people look at me, and they think like, well, this guy's in good shape. He's doing well. Maybe there's something to this. And, my explanations, to their questions, seems to fit. And so then they give it a try. Just from my own observation, without mentioning that this is going to help their pain, so many people have come to me. It's like, my arthritis pain is gone. My back pain is gone. I just feel so much better in all these different ways. And pain seems to be one that comes back again and again and again. And I'm not the only one that seems to experience just no pain after working out. Everyone's like, that's so crazy. I was working with an orthopedic surgeon years ago, and he was sort of getting interested in it, and so he started doing carnivore, and started losing weight right away, started feeling a lot better, having a lot of energy. And we went to the gym once, and he wasn't a big gym guy, but he would go every now and then. And so I went and said, like, why don't you do my workout with me? And I made this guy do so many sets of different exercises, and really pushed him and made him go to muscle fatigue and exhaustion. And I remember him saying, he's like, well, I don't like going, too hard, the night before surgery, because I don't like being sore in surgery. I was like, yeah, but you're not going to get sore. You've been eating carnivore, you're not going to get sore. And he's just like, he was very, very, wary of this. He's like, is this really true? Like, I don't know. And I was just, and so he did it. He ended up doing like the whole workout with me. We were there for like 2 hours, and then he actually had to go. I would have kept him there longer. And
note to self, don't go with Anthony if he asks you to go to the gym.
Yeah. Well, unless you've been carnivore, because you might. And so he was just like, he started looking at me, and he's like, yeah, I'm really interested to see. I'm going to see if this actually works out, if you're actually right about this, about not being sore. And I said, I just fired back at him. I'm like, yeah, I'm interested to see if you're actually doing carnivore, how pure you're actually doing this. And, the next day, we were operating, and he's just looking at me, and he was kind of, a little miffed. He's like, he's like, you're right. Like, I'm not sore. Like, I don't know why. Like, I'm sort of upset about that. I kind of wanted you to be wrong. And so I was like, look, man, I told you this is just a thing. We sat down around lunchtime, and one of the reps came in and brought everyone coffee. I didn't have any. And then after about, 10, 15, 20 minutes into that coffee break, he's sitting there and he's just like, hey, actually, I do actually kind of feel sore. I actually am feeling a bit sore, across the chest and the shoulders. I just pointed at his coffee cup and I was like, what are you drinking? And he's just like, damn it. Like the coffee itself, just started making him sore. And then within 20 minutes of drinking that coffee, he already started feeling sore. Yeah. I noticed the same thing. When I stopped eating all this, I for the second time, I then consciously noticed, like, why I can't get tired or run out of, get sore. And I was like, man, it's just not working out hard enough. And so I put it to the test. I just started doing sets of squats until I wanted to get to muscle, failure, until I was just jello legged and couldn't do another set. I ended up doing 32 sets of squats over 4 hours. And I couldn't even, I was going to failure every set. And, as long as
32 sets.
32. Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to failure every time.
Okay, folks, this may be the most unbelievable thing I have heard so far. 32 body weight squats, back squats. What were you doing?
Back squats. Yeah.
Oh, dear God.
And this is right when I got back from Bangladesh. And so I was doing, so I hadn't worked out in months. And, I did a leg day, and I did a fairly heavy leg day. I did, 12 sets, including squats, but also, single leg, like, stepping up onto a box with, like 185 pounds on my back and, stepping up one leg at a time and, doing that, 3 sets of that and all these different sorts of things. And so, and I wasn't sore. I was like, well, why is that? Am I just not working out hard enough? And I was like, well, I thought that was a pretty big workout, doing 12 sets and, working pretty hard. But at the same time, I didn't walk out of there just, stumbling like, baby gazelle, so I said, okay, well, I'll really go at it next time. And I'll do that 12
volume.
No, I sort of thought about it once, but so what I did was,
you didn't know what your volume was.
Yeah. Well, we probably figured out. I mean, so I did that first 12 sets of, whatever, but then I started doing squats after that 12 sets. And I just started doing squats. So it was 32 sets of heavy legs, but then followed up with the squats at the end of that. I just said, like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing squats until I fatigue and I just can't do anymore. And I was going to fatigue, and I was taking like 4 or 5 minutes off in between sets. I was giving myself a full rest. And I found that as long as I did that, give myself a full rest, I could basically do the same thing. I was doing at the time, it was like, it wasn't that much. It was like 225. And I did, my first set was like 15 reps. And then on my last set, still 225, I did 13 reps, and that was over 20 sets.
So
and
this
then
would imply
the 12
that your
before that.
refractory period is completely changed. Holy smokes. I mean, honest to God, I'm not meaning to be an ass here, but that literally is the most unbelievable thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. Well,
or at least that I've heard on this show.
Yeah. But you can try it, Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it's pretty amazing when we look at, how our body is supposed to function. And, when you stop poisoning it, when you stop, getting in the way of optimal function, and things that we can accomplish really do become pretty impressive. I'd love to hear your perspective, on, so one of the things that, the carnivore diet does, obviously, is gets people into ketosis. And the brain is one of the organs that probably benefits most from ketosis. Many people argue, you'll probably agree with this, that, ketones are the optimal fuel for the brain. But talk a little bit about your perspective on that, what you've seen, and how it maybe interacts with some of the conditions that, some of the conditions that affect the brain that you see. And we can even really touch on the cancer issue which I know a lot of people are afraid to talk about. But again, we have more and more data showing that, ketogenic states are beneficial for many types of cancer, and brain cancer, the types of brain cancer, glioblastoma, are probably at the top of that list.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do agree fully that ketones are our brain's primary energy source and preferred energy source. People will say that it's glucose, but that's just because when you look at biochemistry, we call one a fed state and one a fasting state. In that fed state, it's predominantly running on glucose, but it's also running on ketones. Your brain always runs on ketones. I learned that in undergrad biochemistry, 22 years ago. You may have learned the same thing. Your brain's always running on ketones, and when your body reaches a certain threshold of ketones, no matter how much glucose is in your system, your brain completely switches over to ketones, and it just stops. It just kicks out the glucose. Like, nope, this is what we want. And so I would think that's quite clear evidence that that is our brain's preferred energy source when it has an abundance of glucose, but it has but just a minimum threshold of ketones. It goes just to ketones. That seems to be a preference. Specifically the things that it can help, certainly brain cancer, but also we have 100 years of data on the ketogenic diet benefiting epileptics. So suppressing seizures, even curing seizures, just by going on in a ketogenic state. And I've just anecdotally found that people going on carnivore are further improved. One gentleman, drank coffee, no carbs, and it gave him the seizure when he'd been seizure free for a number of years and had been, multi-drug epileptic, still having uncontrolled seizures. Before he went keto, that got rid of most of it. Then he went carnivore, that got rid of all of it. And then the coffee set off a seizure as well. So he would say that this caffeine is a neurotoxin because of that. Migraines as well. We have literally 100 years of data showing that just being in a ketogenic state helps migraines significantly. There was a study that Professor Ben Bickman of BYU sent me, where they found that like 90% of migraine sufferers back in like the 20s were basically cured of their migraines, and the remaining 10% were significantly improved and had a much reduced burden of migraines and migraine severity. Specifically with cancer of the brain, GBM, glioblastoma being the most common and the most aggressive and deadly. There's quite a lot of research, at least in animal models, from people such as Professor Thomas Seyfried from Boston College, who actually who was an associate professor at Yale in neuroscience for his postdoc, and studied ketones and epilepsy back then, and was told at the time, like, oh no, we have good pharmacology for that. Like, don't worry about that as a line of research. And that's sort of the state that we're in medicine, is that here's a problem, here's a pill. Like, oh, there's a problem, let's find a pill for that problem. And I think I think it's detracted from medicine as opposed to helping it as much as it could, because obviously it's a benefit. It's a massive benefit being able to have these pharmaceuticals, but being completely reliant on them is not a good thing, I think. And so for GBMs, he's done a lot of studies in animal models showing that being in a ketogenic state is significantly beneficial to all cancers, and GBM as well. Even though it's a tough nut to crack, it's still a very aggressive and difficult disease. Very specifically, we know from cancer biology that cancer cells need about 400 times the amount of glucose as other cells in our body to function, because they're not as efficient at it. They can't go through aerobic respiration in the mitochondria. They go through fermentive sort of a fermentive respiration. So they're much less efficient at getting ATP out of glucose molecules. So they need a much higher load of glucose. They pull in about 400 times the amount of glucose. We've known this since Otto Warburg, who won the Nobel Prize in medicine back in the 1930s. And he did a lot of work on cancer and mitochondria, and he showed that. And Seyfried has corroborated it, that that cancer cells have dysfunctional mitochondria that can't process and produce energy as well. So they need a ton of glucose. So just limiting the amount of glucose in your system by being in a state of ketosis is going to significantly improve that, because these mitochondria, these damaged mitochondria, apparently aren't able to work on ketones. So your body can get energy from ketones, and you have a low level of blood sugar, which is perfectly fine for you, but that really curtails the growth of these cancer cells. He's found in animal models that's very beneficial in treating cancer in general, and also with GBM, and also with limiting glutamine, which you can't really limit glutamine. It's just a very, I think it's the most abundant amino acid in our body, but there are medications that have been used for other conditions that sort of block it off, and that's another major fuel source for these cancers. They found that especially the combination of those two significantly help. There are now people that have taken that on board, specifically with cancer in general, and have had good improvements. And there have been some studies on like breast cancers and colon cancers and things like that, but specifically with GBM, like we don't have any like studies with human subjects. However, there are quite a lot of people anecdotally that have just looked at this and said, okay, I'm going to try something else. Like a GBM is, for people who don't know, this is something that's considered an incurable disease. You get a diagnosis of GBM, you now have terminal cancer right then and there. It's not that, oh, this has progressed to the point that this is becoming terminal. It's like you have a diagnosis of that, it is terminal. It's just a matter of when. And so the treatments, how we counsel people in the hospital is that this isn't something that we can cure, but our treatments aren't able to cure. They're just focused on extending life as opposed to getting like an actual cure. So some people just don't like hearing that, especially if they have a very aggressive form, because there are different kinds of GBMs, and there can be more or less aggressive forms. And there was one gentleman I spoke to, Andrew Scarborough, who's in England, who heard this, and he had basically the exact type of GBM that you don't want. It's like the most aggressive form of GBM, and so he looked at that and he just said, okay, well, there's no point in doing chemo and radiation then, because my form of cancer doesn't respond to that. So I need to look at something else. And he came across being in ketosis and ketogenic diet helping cancer. And he started doing that. And then he started, limiting plants. He started going carnivore. He actually started drinking like deuterium depleted water. If you guys have come across that sort of thing, it's kind of interesting, just deuterium being heavy hydrogen, and that seems to affect different signaling processes in our cells. And you get a certain threshold of deuterium, it triggers mitosis and the splitting of cells, just by how like the heavier hydrogen sort of manipulate the active centers in these molecules and make them more or less bioactive somehow. I don't think anyone really understands the full mechanisms, but we apparently, you hit a certain threshold of deuterium, it triggers the body, the cell, like, okay, let's split now. And so you can get, you can promote growth and mitosis that way, which is, cancer is unregulated growth, which is going back to mitochondria. Mitochondria regulate growth, and if those are dysfunctional, it can't do its job in policing the unregulated growth, which is what cancer is. And so he was doing that for a while. He's not doing that anymore. He's just doing that for a little bit. And being in ketosis actually makes your deuterium levels reduce significantly, because for a number of different reasons, but it does. And so the average life expectancy of someone with a GBM, any GBM, and especially his GBM, without treatment is 3 months. He's now 10 years in, and he has no sign of disease on his MRI. That's literally unheard of, except when you're in this sort of circle and you hear, Thomas Seyfried, he has someone who's been 8.5 years, and he's had a couple of resections. It sort of, will grow, but it grows very slowly. And so it grows big enough and they sort of resect that out, and he goes on his way. Andrew had his initial resection he hasn't had any resections after that. And I have a friend of mine who I sort of pointed these things out to several years ago. She's now 5.5 years in. At her 5-year check, her MRI showed no sign of disease. And she hasn't been full on by any stretch of the imagination. She actually has had a recurrence. And as like Seafried and others say, is like, this is something that like you have to be well on top of, because GBMs are very, very aggressive. There's a Dr. Sophia Clemens over in Hungary, and she has a palomedicina, and I was speaking to her. She has over the last decade, she's had 30 GBM patients and over nearly 200 just brain cancer patients in general. And she's saying that if they're really, really strict on a carnivore diet and a specific fat to protein ratio, that it can stop the progression of their disease, that it doesn't necessarily go away. Other cancers will go away, she's found in her practice, but GBM, it's able to stop it in its tracks, which is, again, unheard of. This is something that's very, very, very uncommon, or just not possible, it's thought, because it is such an aggressive
We've been hearing a
disease.
lot of things that 5-10 years ago were thought to be impossible. We had Chris Palmer on, who told us that they're curing incurable brain dysfunctions with a ketogenic diet. I don't know how many doctors we've had on who said they're curing diabetes, when up until not very long ago, diabetes was incurable. So, hey, why not more?
Well, that's it. And if your body is being given its optimal fuel, and you're not tripping it up with different sorts of weird toxins, your body's just going to work better. And so we don't necessarily understand what that's like, because we haven't really studied it yet. We see different native populations, and we say like, that's weird, they don't get cancer. And there have been studies, in the native Canadians and Alaskans, when eating a traditional diet of just meat and blubber, they don't get cancer. They don't get breast cancer. There was a specific study looking at breast cancer out of, I think, Nova Scotia, anyway, like Eastern Canada. And they found that these people, they just weren't getting breast cancer at all. And, as Thomas Seafried points out, animals in the wild don't get cancer. Now, we don't study every single animal in the wild, but the ones we come across, they don't get cancer. Animals in the zoo, when eating their natural wild diet, don't get cancer. Humans do. Dogs and cats do, but we're eating things that are outside of our species, and we're getting problems. And I think that's why I sort of make the argument, and I'm trying to finish a book on the subject, basically arguing that that these so-called chronic diseases are not diseases per se, but actually toxicities and malnutrition, a toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet and a lack of species specific nutrition. So namely, too many plants, not enough meat. And I think that you can prove that just with the evidence that's available now in the literature.
Wow. Okay. Phil, I've got other questions that have nothing to do with this. I'm going to take us a different direction, but I don't want to do that if you've got more you want to say. And you're on mute right now. There you go.
Yeah, I know. Go ahead. Let's go in a little bit of a different direction to bring this home.
Now we hear you.
Go ahead in a little different direction and bring this home.
All right. I want to back up 20 years to when you were a rugby player. You talked about experimenting with carnivore to help you with performance, and this story about 32 sets of squats. I'm tempted to call bullshit on that, but you don't seem like the kind of guy who'd lie. But you would have been in what, your early 20s then, late teens, early 20s, when we would expect a high level of athletic performance anyway. So how do you know you weren't just performing well just because you were 20 years old?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And obviously, I was thinking that, when I was saying that, I just felt amazing in my early 20s, and in my
Yeah,
head, I
well,
was
I
like, well,
did
of course I
too.
did. I was in my early 20s. Of course I did. But this was in comparison to myself as a professional athlete, I felt night and day different. I basically played 5 years. Well, I was sort of played about 10 years of professional rugby before I went to medical school. And the first 5 years of that were on a carnivore diet. The second 5 years were not. And prior to that, I was an All-American in high school, so when I was 18, I toured with the junior national team. We went to New Zealand. We were playing all against the Maoris and New Zealand boys down there, and did all these different trips, and amazing. And that was on a normal diet. I literally ate McDonald's twice a day on that trip. It was just a way that you could just feed a bunch of people at a time. Like, all right, we're going to McDonald's, just eat whatever the hell you have to eat. And so I was playing a very high level on McDonald's, and fries and sodas and all that garbage, and so you can do it, but then when I went on a carnivore diet, like it was just night and day difference from when I was 19 versus 20. I was just incredibly different experience. And then when I was 25 in England and I started eating sort of breaded meat and just sort of started slipping off of it, a couple months into it, I was like, well, why don't I feel as just unbelievably amazing as I normally do? Am I just not working out as hard? Am I just not, I'm 25 now? Am I just over the hill and I'm just dying now? And I actually thought that. I actually wondered if that was it, if it was an age thing. And it wasn't until I started looking back from now, going like, no, that was it. That was the difference. I was just eating meat then. And it's when I started doing this again at I just turned 38. I'm just about to turn 43 in a couple months, and so it'll be 5 years at that point. I just looked at that and went like, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me. Like, get rid of these stupid things. And I got rid of them. And I just started eating meat again, and exclusively meat, and fatty meat in particular, because I now knew the research about, saturated fat and cholesterol actually being good for you. And, so I started doing that, and I felt better at 38 than I did as a 27-year-old professional athlete.
Wow.
So this is in comparison to myself, and those 32 sets of squats. It does sound incredible. And that was at 38. I was 38 years old when I did that. But at the end of it, like, it wasn't like I did 38 sets and just went, oh gosh, I'm over it. It dawned on me that I could literally just keep doing this the rest of the night. And but I had been there for 4 hours and I had things I needed to do. So I'm like, all right, let's just put a break on this. But, I was listening to different, books on tape, and, I was listening to it, like, Thomas Sowell, who I absolutely love, economist, if you guys haven't come across him, but I just think he's great. Yeah. Great guy. And,
the anointed.
yes, exactly. And so I think I was listening to Wealth, Poverty, and Politics at the time. And so I was listening to that, and I was just in the zone. I was just like, great, I'm listening to something I enjoy. I'm just doing this, and I'll just keep doing sets. And I finally was just like, okay, I could literally be doing this the whole night. And I had a friend of mine, and I'd done stupid big leg workouts before in my early, or in sort of my 20s, but not on carnivore. And I nearly killed myself and just been crippled for like 2 weeks, and just like almost in tears going up and down stairs. And I was like, oh my God, I really hope I didn't do that to myself.
Everybody who lifts understands, oh yeah, I had a heavy leg day,
Yeah.
and now I have to come down a set of stairs.
Yeah.
And I just want to cry.
Yeah. Well, and that was the thing. And I thought about that. And I had a friend of mine call me and said, hey, you want to go hike up this big stupid mountain tomorrow, which sounded awful to me. And I said, I was thinking about, am I even going to be walking the next day? And I said, like, let's take it easy. Let's slow down a step. I may have just done something very stupid, and I may not be walking properly for the next few weeks. So let's just see how I feel in the morning. I've just done this experiment. And I woke up in the morning, it was like nothing had happened. And I started going up the stairs, and it was just like, yeah, that's nothing. I started taking the steps 2 at a time. And I felt, okay, there's something going on there. There's there. I can tell that my hamstrings are not tight, but that they had done work. And it's like, okay, but I felt fine. So I said, fine, let's go hiking. And so I went hiking. It was like this 3-hour hike up this mountain. And it was actually fairly straightforward. I'd done that same hike, the previous
This story
year,
just
and I
gets
hated it.
more and more incredible.
Yeah. Well, and then at that point, I just realized, because I'd just come back from Bangladesh, from working, volunteering the humanitarian, or in the refugee camps there, helping the Rohingya refugees that came over from genocide in Burma, or escaping genocide in Burma. And so I was not in shape. I was really, really out of shape, but I'd been on carnivore now for 2 weeks. And I was trying to get back in shape for rugby. And that's why I was eating some vegetables and some meat, but then I was like, and I wasn't feeling great. And then I felt like, well, right, that's it. Plants are trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And then after about 2 weeks of that, I was at this point now, and I felt amazing. I was still out of shape. I had a lot of excess, fat on me, and I had not been running or doing anything in a very long time. And, I did that leg workout. The next day I did this big hike, and I just felt amazing. I'm like, right, I'm ready. I'm going back. And I went to rugby practice that night, with my team in Seattle, which was now a professional, it's the MLR, Major League Rugby, the Seawolves up in Seattle. And so I was with them, and I was I was like, all right, well, let's push myself like I did when I was doing carnivore in my early 20s. Everything I did was at maximum capacity. It was like, everything's a dead sprint. I'm just push myself as hard as I can go and see what happens. And I could just go again. And so these people had been, training for months that I'd been away in Bangladesh, and I was keeping up with everything, just guns blazing. Again, the next day still was not sore. And 2 days after, still was not sore, but I could feel my legs were healing. And I was like, okay, yeah, you've done a lot of work. You could do it again, but eventually you're going to tear something. That was sort of the impression that I got, but there wasn't any stiffness or soreness. And 2 days after that, I went to meet a friend for coffee. And I was thinking in my head, like, all right, well, how does coffee? Because I was still in the experimental phase of carnivore, still sort of testing it out. So I'm like, okay, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And I was still researching, looking into it. And so I said, okay, well, what about coffee? Can I have coffee? Is that something I hadn't had in several weeks? So let's try it back in. Let's see what it does. I had 1 cup of black coffee, and in 20 minutes or so, my hamstrings started getting all tight. My glutes were all tight and sore. My back was getting stiff. And I was like, oh, I could actually feel it in real time. Wow. My body's stiffening up. And I was like, okay, what's happening? And I was sore for the next 2 days. And so that's when I was like, okay, yeah, right. This is just a universal, these things.
The soreness is not the buildup of lactic acid.
No.
That implies that the soreness is actually the reaction. It's either the toxin itself or the body's reaction to the toxin.
Yeah.
I'm thinking clearly on that, aren't I?
I would say so. Yeah. And the lactic acid, that's your oxygen debt for the work you're doing at the time. And when you switch into an anaerobic form of metabolism, and you run out of oxygen, so you can't go down the normal rate, so you create lactate as a result of that. But that's called your oxygen debt. And when you breathing heavily and you catch your breath, you're actually converting that lactate over again and making energy from that. So you get rid of that lactic acid right then and there. So you have that burn from working out, and it's painful. That I still get that. You're still going to get lactic acid buildup. And I don't know if I can tolerate it more or less than other people because of this, but I do experience that. But once it's gone, it's gone. It doesn't just show up 2 days later for no reason. It's a quick turnover on that. And so I think that's something that's, again, just been sort of just repeated so many times that people just say, oh, well, that's just what that is. But I don't think that it is. I don't think physiologically it could possibly be. And in my experience with this, it doesn't line up with that either, because I'm not getting that soreness and stiffness. Wow. It really is a product of what we're eating, I find.
Phil, we don't talk about your workouts much, but you've been carnivore for, I don't know, a long time. Do you have that same do you have that feeling of I'm sorry, we got to let you
Yeah,
go because you got a plane to catch, but do you
no, it's
have
all
that
right.
feeling like you can just keep going?
Yeah, you know, I don't work out nearly to the degree that Anthony does, but you know, where I notice it is really, you know, when it comes to surgery and work, and you know, where I would, you know, be noticeably tired at the end of a long surgery, you know, 10 years ago. Now I, you know, am not, and I'm just like, okay, bring on the next one. You know, let's keep going. And that's, you know, that's where I notice it most. But I can also say, you know, when I do those extra hard workouts, and again, my extra hard workouts are going to be, uh, you know, cakewalks for Anthony. But when I do what I consider to be an extra hard workout, I also notice I'm not sore at all, you know, afterwards.
This has been one of the most encouraging. I mean, everything's, these are all great, but holy smoke, this is really, really encouraging to me for reasons that have nothing to do with the show. All right. Well, ordinarily Phil can hang around and chit chat, but he's got a plane to catch and we don't want him to miss his ride back home. Anthony, I've got a boatload of contact information for you. We'll make sure that that is posted in the show notes. Is there one or two particular ways you'd love for people to get a hold of you you'd like to share right now?
Sure. Well, I think the main one is just my YouTube channel and podcast. My YouTube channel is just my name, just Anthony Chaffee, MD, and that's where I post all of my videos and my long form interviews and you know, shorter videos just talking about these sorts of things. And my podcast is just the Plant Free MD, and that's on available on anything, any platform.
MD.
Yeah, well, yeah, just sort of, you know, tacking onto that, my
Love it.
sort of origin story on all this is just because I just stopped eating plants, you know, because they're you know, they're trying to kill you, and
Trying to kill you.
and
I
and
love
then
it.
and then yeah, Instagram is I'm also very active on Instagram. That again is just Anthony Chaffee, MD.
All righty. Well, all of that stuff will be available in the show notes for our listeners. And wow, it's been a privilege. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, thank you both very much. I really do appreciate it, and it was an absolute pleasure to meet both of you. I hope you can do it again.
All right. Well, for Dr. Philip Ovadia, I'm sorry, Phil, for Dr. Philip Ovadia, who's getting on a plane, I'm Jack Heald. This is a Stay Off My Operating Table podcast. We do one of these every week about this time, and we'll talk to y'all next time.
Bye.